Hey guys, anyone who's been following Linux related news will know that there is a new family of Ubuntus hitting the scene 15.4, and today I am going to be reviewing them. I'm going to be focusing my reviews around Ubuntu Mate because that's the newest of the Ubuntu family, but I'm also going to be talking about Ubuntu in a slightly wider capacity here as well. I'm also going to be talking about some of the benefits of using a short-term support release over a long-term support release, and I'm going to be explaining the differences, and there is going to be a fair amount of rambling in this video. So I'm going to sum up the video right here and say that the latest Ubuntu releases 15.4 are pretty good. They are about as good as the quality we've come to expect from Ubuntu this time around. I've had no major problems whatsoever on Ubuntu Mate or any of the other Ubuntus when it comes to setting up and installing. There were a few minor glitches that weren't show-stopping, but I tested out a lot of day one releases. That's releases I downloaded and installed on the day of their release. So when they hit mass market, they, often bugs sometimes seem to surface just when several thousand people start using a distribution over the several hundreds that might have been testing it. But that being said, overall, very, very happy with the distribution. It seems to be a pretty steady course for Ubuntu. However, that being said, there is the release of Kubuntu, the KDE variant, and they've brought along with it the fifth version of the Plasma desktop, so that's Plasma 5, which I'm going to cover a little bit in this video, not too much, but it does look pretty neat. So, as you can see here, this video is going to be slightly different to what you're used to, mainly in the sense that what you're actually seeing today is my actual desktop. I usually show my distributions installed in a virtual machine, but today I thought I might show you my actual desktop. And the reason is because I wanted to give Mate, the desktop, a good run for its money, and to see what it's like on a computer like mine. Now, I also tried Lubuntu, the LXDE equivalent, and to cut that review reasonably short, after using it for a few days, I noticed that as much as I love Lubuntu, I think Lubuntu is a fantastic distribution. It's one that I've installed on my parents' computer, which was an old XP machine, and they just, they were thinking about buying a whole new computer, spending several £100s on a brand new machine because their old XP, it was getting pretty rusty and slow, and obviously XP isn't supported anymore. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, instead of splashing out several £100 on a new computer, let me just install Lubuntu, LX, obviously I didn't explain it to them in those kind of technical terms. And I installed Lubuntu, the latest long-term support release, and they have had zero problems with it whatsoever. Absolute zero problems with it. Lubuntu is a fantastic distribution for such occasion where you want to breathe new life into old hardware. And I would even say that Lubuntu would work very, very well on more modern hardware, only on the proviso that you have a reasonably straightforward setup. Now, I am happy to say that Lubuntu and LXDE have gained a lot more support for multiple monitor setups, particularly multiple monitors with different resolutions, which is my setup here, which is why it's a bit unusual you're seeing a 4:3 resolution here, because this is like a side monitor, as it were, from an old monitor that I picked up in an old car boot sale. So it's second-hand, it's goodness knows how many years old. But I'm not one to throw out old tech, especially when you can sort of use it in conjunction with newer stuff. But anyway, yeah, the Lubuntu worked perfectly across multiple monitors with multiple resolutions. I even was able to have different desktop wallpapers for different desktops, or different wallpapers for different monitors, which was really quite nice actually. Which means if you have a nice like panoramic photograph, you can actually have parts of it displayed on different monitors. You have to do a little bit of work in GIMP or something to get that working, but it does look really quite nice. Anyway, that aside, the big problem I had with Lubuntu, which is why I'm not going to be using it for the foreseeable future on this computer, is because it doesn't work particularly well with interesting and complicated multimedia setups. It tends to go directly towards ALSA rather than work its way through Pulse Audio, I think. I could very well be wrong on that one. But it is difficult to do little things like setting a default or fallback piece of hardware. And whereas I'm sure there are workarounds involving installing things like KMix instead of the one that comes with Lubuntu and so forth, or whatever the GTK equivalent is, like Pulse Audio volume control or whatever, which I did sort of have a brief go at. It just seemed to be more complicated than necessary, and one of the things that I think Linux as a entire platform should really move towards, with some exceptions, is to make it more accessible and straightforward and easy just to get up and running and start doing things. I think that there is a bit of a maxim that's been going around for quite a long time that Linux is only free if you don't value your time, and I really want to effectively almost own that criticism in a way, and try and make Linux more efficient for people that aren't willing to get into the terminal and get under the hood. But that aside, if you've got a reason, especially in regards to sound setups and stuff like that, Lubuntu is still probably like a distribution I'd recommend on 9 out of 10 computer setups, really. It's very user-friendly, even though it's very minimalist, and it's very fast. It might not be the most beautiful-looking environment out there. I mean, I'm sure theming and, if you were willing to, switching out the window manager would effectively help. You don't pick LXDE and Lubuntu for the looks. You pick it because you want something that is very fast when it comes to reacting, very low on system resources, and generally a sort of a no-nonsense distribution. Whereas I kind of get the feeling, or I get the implication that that Unity and mainstream Ubuntu is a little bit more frivolous and fancy than that. But anyway, that aside, yes, Lubuntu, it's one that I would recommend. It seems to be as strong as ever, going from strength to strength. It will soon be changing from using GTK, being a GTK-based desktop environment, to a Qt one, because I think they're merging LXQt with LXDE, which, and I know that I think Lubuntu is using LXQt. They're aiming to do it in 15.10, I think, which would be very exciting to see, and it'd be very interesting to see if that would actually rectify some of the problems I've had with fancy and complicated multimedia setups. But that, and how sort of like USB interfaces interact with the desktop environment as well. So I did actually try Xubuntu as well. Xubuntu, fantastic, 0 complaints. If I was to force some kind of criticism out of it, it would be that it kind of, the theming was a little bit on the dated side, but even then, that's stretching. I mean, it didn't look bad, it just looked 10 years old, I guess, is the situation. Easy to customize, very good support on multiple monitors, very good support for USB sound interfaces and stuff like that, in regards to how it sort of integrates into the volume controls into the on the desktop and everything. It's not like a showstopper, but if it means that you have to sort of stop using your USB device and then start clicking away at your mouse, so that you've got to make sure volumes and stuff, and then you've got to go back to USB to make sure that it's all working there. And it's just an extra step in the loop that if you're doing it too often, it's just it's breaking your workflow effectively. So yeah, Xubuntu, 0 complaints. Certainly, I was going to say it's certainly the best out of the bunch, but this is a very good upgrade across the board. I've had 0 problems with it on day 1 release. Way to go. Fantastic. Brilliant stuff. Brilliant stuff indeed. So that's all I've really got to say about it. It's as resolute as ever. And I'm glad to see that XFCE as a desktop environment is actually, well, they recently released their new version, which I think you see in Ubuntu. And it looks pretty good. You know, it's no major changes to it, but there are certainly it's the XFCE that we've all come to know and love, so good. Kubuntu, KDE based distribution. They brought in Plasma 5. I've not actually installed and tested this one, but my favorite by far video editor, Kdenlive, is only now going to be supported on the Qt5 based platform, which is why I've moved from the long-term support release to 6-month Ubuntu releases. I did it with a degree of hesitancy, but the reason I did so is because video editing is something that Linux is lagging quite badly behind on when it comes to Windows and Mac as well. And that being said, it's certainly making leaps and bounds, and Kdenlive is definitely the best bet that Linux has. It has been buggy in the past. It's still not out of the woods in regards to bugginess, but it's certainly a lot better than it used to be. And And unfortunately, if they're only going to be supporting the Qt5 based toolkit for it, that means that I'm going to have to either get with the program or find an old version that works for me. But I really want to see how Kdenlive actually sort of pans out and progresses, because there's a lot of work going in. They've merged significantly more into the KDE framework over the past year or so, which is good in some ways, bad in others. The good ways is that it seems that they can actually benefit from the project as a whole a lot more, which from a developer standpoint I can certainly understand, and think from that standpoint they could very well have made the right decision. The reason I hesitate in completely being all in favor of it is because Kdenlive is such a good piece of software that is used by most video editors who work on Linux, that I would like to see it maybe toolkit independent. Maybe that's pie in the sky thinking. Maybe that's putting more work than necessary for the developers. But I do see that you got programs like GIMP and Firefox and Scribus and Inkscape and Audacity and all of these various very well-known open source applications that are very good at what they do, and they all have different toolkits. Some are Qt, some are GTK, some are their own weird botched together sort of interfaces that don't seem to work with any theme, no matter what you choose. And it would be nice if there was some degree of standardization across the platform. Of course, Qt was originally owned by Nokia, I think it was, and it had proprietary elements, which is why GTK came about. But now it's, Qt, as I understand it, has been fully open sourced, and therefore we just have Qt and GTK, two fully open source toolkits, which I personally, as a user, as an end user, cannot really tell the difference other than some sort of stylistic elements which are reasonably superficial, and can be changed anyway regarding on how you set up your system. So if there's anyone that wants to sort of talk about that, and down in the comment section below about why there may still necessarily be, I get the sort of the competition, the intellectual competition of it. Obviously we're not in a commercial marketplace here, but the idea that there is that element of choice that is always there, and I appreciate that, and I think that is a good thing and a very big upside to using open source and Linux in general. But it also does seem to be some degree of a division, which I'm not entirely sure. And it seems that we've basically just reinvented the wheel with one of them at this point. Could be wrong. Please feel free to correct me down in the comment section below. So I've got a screenshot here, which I'm going to show you. This is a look at the Plasma 5 desktop, and it looks beautiful. I'll probably at some point will have a glance at it. But for those of you that do follow me on the other social medias will know that I'm actually standing in an election in the UK here, a pretty big one, which has taken up most of my time, which is why this video is going to be unedited and a little bit rambly, but also because I kind of wanted to get a lot of thoughts out that would otherwise go into like 6 different videos, and now all going into one. But even if it's just the theme, that is a fantastic, professional looking distribution, and they should very well be proud of that. If it sort of reacts as well as KDE does, I do worry a little bit, because in the release of Plasma 4 desktop, there were more than a few bugs, which I'd like to have seen more serious testing in. So we have I've done Lubuntu, I've done Xubuntu, I've done Kubuntu. I haven't actually had a good look at the Unity-based mainstream Ubuntu as of yet, and I may do or may not do. But to be honest, I'm not a big fan of the Unity desktop, and I know that a lot of people who watch these videos don't actually use Ubuntu and aren't that big a fan of Unity. I know that some of there's like a small number of you that are, but it's not one that I'm particularly enthusiastic to get stuck into, because I know that I probably won't end up using it anyway. So, any of the distributions that I review and any of the desktop environments I review, there is always that possibility that I could ditch whatever it is I'm currently using and actually start using this, whatever I'm reviewing. With Ubuntu, I just never have that feeling. Okay, with Unity, rather. Okay, anyway, the star of today's reviews lineup is Ubuntu Mate, which is this is the last of the Ubuntu family that I've actually had a look at and actually installed and actually tried. And I gotta say, I'm impressed. Very impressed. Very, very impressed. It's on the surface, looking at Ubuntu Mate and what it is and what it aspires to be, kind of gives the impression that it just wants to take Ubuntu back to what it was 6 years ago, but with newer versions of the software. And it kind of does. And I think that's a great thing. I think Ubuntu's user interface was really, really good 6 years ago when it just used GNOME 2. I think GNOME 3 messed up a lot of things. I think GNOME 3 was wrong, and not even wrong, just not a great move to go through. I think that trying to be on the cutting edge of user interfaces at that point by doing that, no, I think they jumped in it too fast too soon, and they took the GTK3 toolkit with them basically, which I think was a very dangerous move, and I think it has divided. It's divided the community in a way that has spawned countless number of desktop environments, and I think there are too many desktop environments now. Someone coming into Linux is going to be presented with like 6 or 7 desktop environments, and they're not going to know the merits and problems and criticisms of each of them. And I think that there is a risk of there being too much choice. You see, on one hand, we've got like 7 different desktop environments to choose from. On the other hand, we've got like 2 or 3 video editors that are passable and certainly, professional quality. Well, not really, I mean, I have used Kdenlive for professional editing before, but it's not anything that I would, put a career into or anything like that. But it is getting there. It is getting there. But I would like to see, I think the effort almost in a way seems to be misplaced, and I think that's one of the issues that you have to deal with when people get to work on whatever projects they want to work on. And being an open source, obviously, they should be able to do that. But it is going to end up with some odd results, like having 300 Linux distributions, which are all fundamentally repackaged versions of about 4 or 5 distributions, which I think is something that we need to have a serious talk about. I don't think just bringing out a new version of Ubuntu later than Ubuntu with a different desktop layout and a different theme really constitutes a place on the distro watch list. But again, like I say, I could talk more about that. The big problem I had with GNOME 2 back in the day was that it didn't have very good support for multiple monitor layouts. This does, but it's super obvious. So I'm using an NVIDIA graphics card, NVIDIA 970, which I'm NVIDIA GeForce 970. It's the one that the controversy's been about. I actually recommend it unless you're using a monitor with a 4K or even 2K resolution. If you're just using a monitor that you're using just regular high def, I guess that's a weird expression. When you're using 1920 by 1080 resolution, or a couple of those monitors, the NVIDIA GeForce 970, just one of those cards, will be more than you need. And also you could double up. You can have 2 of them. And considering the controversy has just dropped the price, I got to say, I've certainly considered it, but I've yet to run into any limitations for the card, a single NVIDIA GeForce GTX. But the NVIDIA drivers are actually pretty good for Ubuntu, and they allow multiple monitor support as part of the drivers, which I think is really, really good. Also very important to bear in mind for users of newer GeForce graphics cards. This is the first Linux distribution, so 15.4 is the first distribution that has the NVIDIA GeForce 970, the latest NVIDIA drivers in the repositories. That's really, really useful if you bought a graphics card in the last 6 months. That's pretty top of the line. There were other ways of getting newer graphics cards running, but they've actually included them as part of the operating system now, which is good. Okay, so when it came to Mate, what they've done to effectively get better support for multiple monitors, and what I mean is I want my panel, so you can see here the panel down at the bottom, I want that to be on a non-main monitor, right? My main monitor, right, if I click start or whatever and load up a game, that game will then load up in my monitor full screen. So if I want to sort of tab out or switch out, it means that I have a menu so that that screen is like dedicated to the game that I'm playing, and then if I'm recording it or whatever, then I go on to monitor 2, which is what you're seeing here, which is where the menu is and all that kind of stuff, so I can actually get it works best for my multitasking layout anyway. That being said, there are plenty of people that want to say have taskbars on each of their monitors, because it means that their mouse doesn't have to travel too far to actually open up a new program. That being said, I have a trackable mouse, so I can move my mouse just like across multiple monitors easily. I love trackable mice. I know some people think that I'm actually absolutely barbaric and completely confusing for using a trackable mouse. I'll show it. There it is. Very simple. 4 buttons. That's the thing that I'm using. But yeah, and I absolutely love it because it means I get a great deal of precision, and it means that I can move sort of quite long distances across monitors without actually having to move my, without my hand basically bumping into anything. But that being said, that's a personal choice, but it does give me the advantage that I only have to have one monitor, one taskbar on one of my monitors. Now, that being said, right, if you wanted to change which desktop and which monitor the taskbar was on, usually under GNOME 2 and currently under GNOME 3, unless you install some third-party add-on that could break next time you update GNOME. Sorry, I've got to pronounce it correctly. Yeah, so Mate, so I keep calling it Mate. I'm going to keep calling it Mate because that's how it comes across to me. I'm British. How you move your bars, you right-click, you do properties. It's not actually completely obvious. And then you unclick Expand. Expand will give you a nice little handle down here in the corner, which will allow you to move it, and then I can move it across, and then I can move it across back. There we go, and then you just click Expand, and there you go. And then what you can do is you can then right-click on the panel, you can do a new panel, and then you could effectively do one for each of your monitors, or even just whatever monitors you wanted to use. So they have done that. They have given decent support to multi-monitor setup. I will say one thing though against it is that you can't, or you don't appear to be able to have different background wallpapers for different monitors. Obviously not a showstopper. If you put in, it compensates for different aspect ratios. So this monitor here is 4:3. This monitor over there is 16:9. If I put this, it will have the same desktop background, but it will crop it rather than stretch it, which means that it still looks pretty good on both monitors. So it's a minor fault. It's a minor criticism rather. It's not even a fault. It would be nice to see them tackle it eventually, but goodness knows it's the smallest of details, really, the smallest details. They've got multiple monitor support in terms of panels. As you can see here, this is my syncing with Google Drive. So that's good. It works. That installed out of the box. You can see I've got installed Chrome here. For those of you that are scorning at me now for saying, "Oh, you're not using an open source browser," Chrome it has the most up-to-date version of Flash, and as someone that does a lot of work with multimedia, that's something that's a real benefit. I mean, I could probably survive on in a flashless environment, or using the out-of-date piece of software that they include in the repositories, but it's going to make my job more difficult. So so there you go. This has certainly been a rambly video, but it's not been as long as it could have been. Okay, so in short, Ubuntu Mate, fantastic. I've heard a lot of good news about it in regards to it even getting hardware deals for people that who aren't running a sort of a really, really fast machine, who want something that is maybe a little bit slower than Unity, or something it's a little bit lighter than what Unity is. You wouldn't, if you wanted a lightweight distribution, a lightweight desktop environment, I would recommend Lubuntu or XFCE, depending on how lightweight you wanted it mixed, in combination with how feature rich you want it to be. Mate, Ubuntu Mate, it's a good middle ground. It's a good mid-level browser. It's less resource intensive than KDE. It's less resource intensive than Unity. It's less resource intensive than GNOME. So there you go. I call it mid-level, somewhere between XFCE and KDE. I know a lot of you guys are likely to tell me that, well, you can actually slim down KDE a lot, and I'm sure you can. But again, I think that it's important to bear in mind that people aren't going to be super keen to get under the hood of their operating system to squeeze every little ounce of performance out of their computer. They want something that they can install and go. I do, especially if I'm going to be updating my distribution every 6 months now, rather than just using the long-term support release. I want something that works as well out of the box as possible. So that's a big important tenet for me. It's something that I respect when distributions take that into consideration. And I did notice when I was using KDE quite recently that it does have more bloat than it could have. I mean, it's a full-featured desktop environment, and I think that it would be, if I had any say in the issue, it would be my front and center desktop environment for newbie-friendly distributions. And I'd have it instead of Unity. I'd have it instead of was it Pantheon that Elementary are using. I'd have that would be that would be the consistent paradigm. That would be what newbies can expect, where all the buttons are. And then maybe other distributions that might not necessarily want to use KDE but would still take inspiration from its layout, so that there would be this degree of consistency, and that more advanced users could then customize from that. So anyway, Mate Tweak as well is an interesting tool that comes with it. You can actually select lots of different panel layouts. Redmond is what I've got. You can use Redmond with Mate menu. So as you can see down here, I've got the very traditional, sort of menu layout and all this kind of stuff, right? The Mate menu is like a panel, very similar to what you might get in Cinnamon or Windows 7, that kind of thing. And it's quite good because you can just bring it up and start typing in your program rather than having to navigate menus and stuff like that. I don't have a problem navigating those menus. And also, I did notice that the Mate/Mate menu is a little bit on the slower side, not super quick. This, clicking up. There you go. Very, it's certainly the quickest in response to the menu. And also, you can just press Alt F2 and then start typing in. So if I did Alt F2 and then wanted to do Chrome, I could just do Chrome. It will bring up the Chromes, and I could click or even just press Enter. Or could I? I don't know. InSync. I don't know. Like, you could work it out basically. If I was big, I just go through to the menu. So that's pretty good. It's using now. Kaja or Kaja. Again, it's what you'd expect from Metacity. That's what it used to use, or something. I don't know. It's the same. It's the same file manager. It does the same function. Dolphin, Thuna, Metacity. They all do the job. Really, it's not. And these are some of my original works. I say original works, photos that I've taken. Just to round it up now, Mate, right? This is Ubuntu. This is DistroWatch's rankings, hit page ranking. So you can read the description there. It tells you about how they measure the support of various distributions based on their website. Analytics, right? So this column here on the far left is an average per day of the last 12 months. So you can see Mint is at the top here. So on average, 2,680 people visited that website from different IP addresses a day. Then you've got Ubuntu here. Now, it is important to bear in mind that Linux Mint is often sometimes seen by the more intermediate/advanced members of the Linux community as sort of the most popular distribution, but that's not necessarily true, because if you look, yes, Mint might be the most popular over the course of the last 12 months and the course of the last month, and look, it is pulling out quite far ahead. And I've got to say, Linux Mint has done a lot of things right. And especially now, I think moving to the long-term support releases of Ubuntu, even though I need more up-to-date software than that, I think Mint have made the right choice to put stability higher up on their agenda. And also more traditional desktop paradigms, because people don't want to have to learn a new way to use a computer every couple of years, right? Let's keep that in mind. So, but yeah, Ubuntu is. But then you've got, the thing is with the Ubuntu websites is you've got Lubuntu at 15 here with 704. Right, Mint put all their distributions, their Mate version, their Cinnamon version, their KDE version, their LXDE version, all in as part of their one website, which means that accounts for all of the Mint distributions. This only accounts for Ubuntu's Unity distribution and their server distribution and their, flagship stuff. Whereas, if you add Lubuntu on top of that, well, you've already got 2500 there, and then it's almost matching Mint. So you take Ubuntu and like two of the any other Ubuntu alternatives, and it's practically challenging Mint there, and then it's most popular. So I think there is a lot to say that that Mint and Ubuntu, they're closer together. Mint isn't pulling out its head in such an obvious way as it might first appear. Because you've got Xubuntu at 24, which is doing quite well actually over the podcast, over the long term. But over the last month, you've got Kubuntu at 26, you've got Xubuntu at 22, Lubuntu at 14. So they're not sort of hugely jumping the way up. But you look at Ubuntu Mate, it was 139, right? If you take the average hits on their website per day for the last 12 months, it's 80. And it's 139 in the charts. It doesn't even make the top, right? Then you go to the last 6 months, and it's just broken into the top 100. Just broken into the top 100. There was a long time when Ubuntu Mate, it was practically a nobody distribution. Then we start looking at the last 3 months, and it shot straight up to 41, and now in the last month, 28. And I think the quality of this distribution speaks for itself. It's really good at what it wants to do. It's set out what it wants to do clearly. It wants to be a more traditional desktop paradigm, and it wants to be an Ubuntu base. It wants to have the support of Ubuntu. It wants to have the package repositories of Ubuntu. It wants to be what Ubuntu was 6 years ago, but with modern software, and it is. And it's fantastic. I really, really, really like it. Mate is, I was a bit umming and erring about it, partly because I didn't think Ubuntu Mate would actually survive. I think that it was just I gotta say, a part of me thought that it was a knee-jerk reaction to GNOME 3 and GTK 3. But it stays, And I do think that there is a problem with almost too many distributions and too many desktop environments. But it's not really for me or anyone else to say what someone can't do and can't work on. So it's a catch-22. But I think that when you have some distributions which effectively just put a new wallpaper on an Ubuntu distribution and then market it as a completely different name, first of all, that's not really a distribution in and of its own right. You've just rehashed another one. But secondly, if you are selling that as a newbie-friendly distribution, right, you can't then go ahead and say that you've got the support and backing of the Ubuntu community when you don't, because there are a lot of distributions that say it's built on the solid base of Ubuntu. But you go to the Ubuntu forums and try asking about Flibdi-Flob OS that's based on Ubuntu but has just, shifted around the panels a little bit and changed the wallpaper and the icon theme. They ain't going to help you because it's not an official, they don't know what that distribution is made up of. They don't know whether or not you've put in third-party PPAs or whatever. You don't have the support. Ubuntu can't give you the support of these releases. So I think there is a problem there, especially when sometimes, some of these Ubuntu variants are the Linux operating system version of Snake Oil, to be honest, where it's, you're selling a distribution as a user-friendly distribution with the support and stability of an Ubuntu-based operating system, when Ubuntu would not support your distribution because they can't. Because they can't. They can support Ubuntu. They can't support what crawls out of it, unfortunately. Anyway, enough of that rant. Let me know, of course, what you think down in the comment section below, because you guys have proved me wrong on more than a few occasions on these kind of things. And like I say, what's the solution? We're going to tell people that they can't hash together software and flog it on the internet? I mean, or not even flog it on the internet, just like give it away for free. I think there is the degree of people being misled by operating systems that are pretending to be something that they're not, but that's a problem, and it's a problem that I don't see a solution to. But there you go. And maybe it's just like vocal members of the Linux community just supporting more serious operating systems with a larger community support base. I don't know. Anyway, let me know, of course, your thoughts down in the comment section below. Ubuntu Mate, Ubuntu Mate. Glad it's been brought into the Ubuntu fold. It's really, really everything you could expect from a Mate-based distribution. I'm going to be using it as my main desktop environment and my main OS for the time being. The reason I decided to go, like I say, to the more like the 6-month updates rather than the 2-year ones was because I realized that when I was using Linux Mint, I was using a long-term support version of Ubuntu basically, but with like 101 third-party PPAs, because I wanted to have this stable base operating system, but then I wanted to have more up-to-date software on top of that, so a stable base, cutting-edge software on top of it. The problems that I occasionally ran into was that third-party PPAs were then clashing with other pieces of software on, the various third-party PPAs were clashing. Sometimes the PPAs wanted a newer version of something in the repositories when a piece of software in the repositories didn't. And there was dependency issues and version issues and things like that. Whereas when you have a 6-month scheduled release, everything is all updated at the same time in 6-month increments, which makes things a little more stable if you want more up-to-date pieces of software. I think someone mentioned that in the comment section. That kind of got me thinking, and then I kind of realized that they were right, that I was actually, in my attempt to find a more stable operating system that required less maintenance, I ended up having a less stable operating system requiring more maintenance, whereas just setting a day aside every 6 months, or even like half a day aside every 6 months, because it took me an afternoon to get Ubuntu Mate up and running the way I liked it. Bearing in mind, of course, I'm not familiar with Mate/Mate. I'm not familiar with the Ubuntu Mate at all. So I'm familiar with GNOME 2. I was familiar with GNOME 2 back in the old Ubuntu days. So I guess that's kind of... But I had practically zero problems. Again, it's a day one release. There were little bits that were rough around the edges that have no doubt already been patched, and certainly not any showstoppers or anything that would even deter a reasonably new Linux user from what I can tell. So I gotta say, roaring success, very happy with it. Keep doing what you're doing, guys. Really, really good stuff. I think the state of Ubuntu is pretty good. I gotta say, I'd love to see them move away from Unity. I always say this time and time again. I know you guys almost hate Unity as much as I do. And I hate it because we got to bear in mind that Ubuntu is the media face of GNU Linux. And when they kind of do something like use a self-made desktop environment, that, as far as I can see, doesn't show support for the GNU community as much as it could do. I'd like to see them use GNOME or GNOME or KDE, XFCE, Mate, whatever. Just put something front and center that's more readily and easily available on other operating systems, because I know there are some problems with Unity being available on things like Fedora and whatever, and also something that's a little more popular among the Linux community, something that we'd be a lot more proud to introduce people to and to support people with. But I have read a number of blog posts and articles saying that, well, the supporters of Unity might not be the most vocal, but there are quite a few number of them. Anyway, let's have, like I say, we can all talk about it in the comment section below. Thank you for letting me just ramble on. I know this is a long video, but like I say, I've basically amalgamated a lot of thoughts into one, and I've covered a lot of points. So thanks very much for watching. I hope you found some use in this, and if you are interested in something a bit more full-featured. To be honest, it is quite polished, is Ubuntu Mate. So if you want something full-featured, polished, a little bit like what you expect Ubuntu to be without Unity, I think Ubuntu Mate it's certainly accelerating fast in terms of popular opinion, and I think it will continue to do so. And I think Now, I could very well be wrong on this one. It'll be when it settles on a steady long-term place in the DistroWatch charts, it'll be the second most popular one next to Ubuntu. I think it will overtake Lubuntu, which is it's been at a steady 14, 15 place for goodness knows how long now. Rightfully so. Fantastic distribution is Lubuntu, and I think that we could see Ubuntu Mate hit square with something like Elementary, maybe. In fact, one of the desktop paradigms in Mate Tweak basically makes Ubuntu Mate look the same as Elementary anyway. I will be doing Elementary OS sometime after the election. I know I've had just so many emails about it. People just asking what my thoughts are on it or whatever. And like I say, I'm not going to give my thoughts on it, especially now that so many people have talked to me about it. I'm not going to give like loads of thoughts on it now without fully testing through the distribution. You know, I can't give you a 10-minute first impressions kind of video on Elementary, considering how many of you guys are interested to talk about it really. So that being said, thank you very much for watching. That's about it from me today. If you are interested in a solid but reasonably up to date, or like a solid up to date Mate based operating system, Ubuntu Mate is it's about as good as it comes, especially if you're looking for something like I say up to date. Mint does a Mate version as one of its flagship distributions, certainly worth a look at. In fact, to be honest, they should scrap Cinnamon, as far as I'm concerned now. I'm really impressed with Mate. I used to think that it was just trying to keep GNOME 2 alive beyond its years, but it's not. It's a really good, solid desktop environment in its own right, and I think that Cinnamon is really just trying to reinvent it. And again, we're reinventing it. We have a real problem with that in the Linux community. It's just coming up with a good piece of software and then going, "Ooh, I want to make something just like that." You know, it's whatever, you know. So anyway, thanks very much for watching. That's about it from me today. Until next time, I've been Chris Ware, and you've been awesome. Take care.